Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, along with Kimberly Guilfoyle, Bob Beckel, Eric Bolling, and Greg Gutfeld. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived back in Washington yesterday after a week of negotiations that failed to result in a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says brokering peace will be impossible if Hamas continues on its current path.
Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No. I said I do not want to live with a state of occupiers.
Sorry, that was the Hamas leader who was rejecting the idea of an Israeli Jewish state. Listen now to Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel.
Hamas has broken 5 ceasefires that we accepted and we actually implemented. They rejected all of them, violated all of them, including 2 humanitarian ceasefires in the last 24 hours. Now they come with their own ceasefire proposal, and believe it or not, they violated even their own ceasefire proposal. They're shooting at us as we speak. So Israel is not obliged and is not going to let a terrorist organization determine when it's convenient for them to fire at our cities, at our people. We'll take the necessary action to protect our people, including, by the way, continue to dismantle the tunnels. That's my policy.
Hamas has another weakness, the fledgling support of the Palestinian people, who are war-weary after Hamas's provocations caused Israel to respond. And I just want to play one more soundbite for you from Representative Mike Rogers, who this morning talked about how Israel feels like they are going at this alone.
I think there's always been a little bit of friction between Netanyahu and this administration, and I think early on some of the early ceasefire requirements didn't recognize, at least in Israel's perspective, they didn't recognize their security concerns about them continuing anti-tunneling operations. With that lack of consideration, I think they believed that they were kind of going this alone.
Eric, let me start with you. I want to ask about the idea that Israel, who said it was willing to do a ceasefire, but then Hamas broke its own ceasefire. How are they supposed to actually negotiate and work with what is a terrorist organization that doesn't think that they have a right to exist?
It's baffling. The only way I can see anything coming out of that, as far as a ceasefire and a resolution, would probably be through someone else, through Egypt, through another country. The United States, what John Kerry did was laughable. On one hand, we have a recognized terrorist organization in conflict with one of our greatest allies, if not our greatest ally. And the deal that Kerry put together Friday night that came out was, number one, Israel lifts its Gaza blockade. Mm-hmm. Number two, we supply billions in foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority. And number three, Hamas is not required to dismantle their tunnel system or their missile setups. I mean, it was everything Hamas wanted. So, of course, Saturday morning, Israel says, you know, we're not playing this game. Hamas fires the first shot. Israel continues. I'm just trying to figure out if John Kerry and the Obama administration thinks this is where the American people are. I don't. I think the American people recognize. Don't forget, there's 1,300 or 200, 300 Palestinians who are dead now. But how many thousands of people have Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Iranian terrorists killed? I mean, compare that to the Israeli numbers, not the 1,300.
That's a good transition for my question for Bob about the clarity of war for the Gazan people. So regardless of what the Israelis want and what the Americans want, the Gazans themselves, I don't know if you agree with this, are starting to realize that maybe Hamas is not the savior that they were hoping it would be, and that they are actually using Gazan civilians as targets in its war with Israel.
Well, you know, that's what happened when the PLO sort of broke off from Hamas and established themselves in the West Bank area. So I'm not surprised. I mean, at a certain point, these people are the ones who are suffering because Hamas is using them for their own shield, if you will. But let me go back to Kerry for a second. There has not been a successful U.S. negotiation trying to get ceasefires in the Middle East, as far as I know, since Jimmy Carter at Camp David. The United States has had a miserable track record doing this because the United States is part of, at least perceived to be, by the Arabs as part of the problem. And so I'm not so sure that it ought to be done like that. Eric may be right. I mean, although Egypt tried to do a ceasefire, it didn't work. I see that the UN Security Council gave a unanimous resolution asking everybody to cease and desist. It wasn't binding. So I'm not so sure it's not time for the United States to make it clear that they, as I said on Friday, I think they have to make it clear that Israel's getting the bad end of this, but they put it into somebody else's hands, because I just don't think it's a successful thing for us to do.
Can I follow up on that,
Sure.
if I may? How's this going to work? Because I hear what you're saying. I don't even think it's the person doing the ask or trying to meet in the middle. I don't even think it's a problem, because it's the United States that might be behind it, and they see us as more pro-Israel or sympathizers for Israel. Hamas in its charter calls for the destruction of Israel. They refuse to recognize Israel. They do not want Israel to exist, period. That's sort of like a deal breaker right out from the get-go. So how is Israel, who is trying to, I believe, negotiate in good faith, but as you see Netanyahu pointing out, Hamas violates the ceasefires that they propose. This is a very difficult situation, no matter who's at the table suggesting it. I don't think they're not doing it because it's us, is my point.
No, I think part of it is that, but I think the answer to that is that Israel needs to do a two-state resolution with the PLO in the West Bank territories. That's where, and let Gazans continue to fight. Eventually they're going to be war-weary, and they're not going to be able to get enough missiles. But we have to set the fact that Gaza should not be part of a new Palestinian state.
Okay, let me get Greg in here. You could probably, I like it when you go last in the first round, because then you get to clarify everything for us. I just want to get your take, because maybe you'll want to talk about this. The media's perception of how the war is going. I've watched network news last night, and I was really surprised, because what was being reported online didn't seem to match what was being said on television. And in some ways, the media is saying that Israel is actually losing the longer war, and so they're trying to say that they're not in a strong position.
Yesterday, I think Katie Crowley actually said Israel is losing the media war.
Right. Exactly.
She's in the media. So she's essentially self-fulfilling. She is saying it, and she's in the media. John Kerry doesn't inspire confidence. He inspires sleep apnea. And I don't understand why, as we have radicals running around the world killing innocent people, we have decided to broker a deal which actually hogties Israel. I believe Israel should go it alone, in the sense that they should be allowed to win. A ceasefire only helps a weak aggressor. It's like a referee in a fight that's separating two brawlers because one is losing, when, in fact, you should stay out of it and let the fight end quickly. That's more merciful, because right now a ceasefire is just a speed bump. It's a speed bump that slows and lengthens the suffering. You cannot trust the untrustable. These are people that are violating their own ceasefires. Right. They're calling a timeout, and then they punch you in the face. You can't trust that. These are not Mouseketeers. They're Mosketeers. That's
actually an interesting thing. Eric, I want to get your take on this, because there have been flare-ups like this before. We've talked about them. But Israel says that this is somewhat different, in that even their intel, which is very good, and ours, did not understand the extent to the sophistication of the tunnels that Hamas has been able to build. And they were planning a major disruption, a major terrorist attack with the aim of killing thousands of Israelis on Rosh Hashanah. Does not Israel have an obligation to its people then to destroy those tunnels?
Absolutely, they do. They have not only an obligation, they have the right to do it. So the media war that you talked about, this afternoon on MSNBC, I couldn't believe they start using a new term. It's called proportionality. In other words,
disproportionate.
Right, it's disproportional. Deaths on one side and attacks. You know, Israel's too strong for the opposite, the aggressor. And that what they're trying to do is they're trying to spin the debate against Israel, which is absolutely foolish. There is no reason that Israel shouldn't go in there and destroy all these tunnel structures. Here's what really needs to happen. On one side, you have Egypt, and on another side you have Jordan. So what allegedly was going on is, in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians, or the Hamas, was bringing terrorist, guns, kidnappings through the tunnels from Jordan. You need to stop it. No, through Egypt and Jordan. Sure, Bob. There's only two other sides. One's water, the other's Israel.
I don't want to correct you, but Jordan is way.
Yes, but they were saying that they were bringing the tunnels under the border and getting people from Jordan
all the way
and missiles. Absolutely. Iran and Syria are supplying missiles. Laugh all you want.
I'm not laughing.
After the show, you can Google it, or you can call the Brain Room and find out. Iran and Syria were providing military weaponry, including missiles, through Jordan, through the tunnel system.
This was the question I was going to raise, is really where do these missiles come from? We know they come from the Iranians.
And Syrians.
And perhaps the Syrians. I just don't know how they get in. I mean, you can't tunnel under Israel to do that.
Well, we know that there are tunnels, and we know that I think we all agree
there are tunnels
that they have
in
a right
Gaza.
to
That's right.
Let me ask you, Kimberly, as a negotiator, let's take you back to, so the United States is somewhat of a third party, but an active one in this.
Yes.
John Kerry, as a senator, wasn't really known as being the great negotiator, but he's been trying to establish some sort of a peace deal. That was recognized as a major failure across the board. So then we're back to the drawing board, and now the war started. If you're John Kerry's team, what do you think is the best negotiating position for him at the moment? Is it to stay quiet for a while or to work more behind the scenes? Because he has made everybody in the region mad.
He certainly has. He's poking the cage a lot, and it's not getting a good result. I think he is in a very difficult position, as we talked about earlier, to try and broker some kind of negotiation or peace between two sections that don't want to have peace whatsoever. They both feel that they are in the right. And then the problem, I think, is he's got to go behind the scenes, like you said, to put some support and pressure in that area in a way that he thinks would be meaningful. Because Khalid Mashal is a $2.5 billion estimated net worth. This is a guy who's sitting in a luxury hotel in Qatar, completely removed, and has been someone who has profited off of the misery and the suffering of the Gazans even. He's got no motivation to even try to broker peace because he doesn't even have to. So get to that guy.
We're going to have to tease. I just want you to know that there's an intricate map being drawn at the table, a collaborative effort between Beckel and Bowling. I don't know if we'll be able to bring you the results before the end of the show. But when we come back, Islamic militants have Christians terrified for their lives in Iraq, and pressure is mounting on President Obama to address the deepening crisis. Iraqi Christians were at the White House protesting, and we've got the video next on The Five.